Alright, let's talk about Nikolai Volkoff, the towering, Soviet flag-waving, anthem-singing villain that terrorized American audiences throughout the golden age of professional wrestling. If you were a wrestling fan in the 1980s, you couldn't miss him. He was the kind of guy who could walk into an arena, start belting out the Soviet national anthem, and immediately have the crowd foaming at the mouth. But behind the character was a Yugoslavian immigrant who loved the business and left an unforgettable mark on professional wrestling. Welcome to Wrestling with Me, the ultimate destination for wrestling fans. Get ready to dive into the world of high-flying action, jaw-dropping moments, and all the drama inside the squared circle. Whether you're here for legendary matches or in-depth analysis, this is the place to be. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell to stay in the loop as we bring you the best wrestling content every week. Born in 1947 in what was then Yugoslavia, he grew up in a tough environment. The post-World War II era was not exactly a picnic in Eastern Europe, and he knew early on that he wanted something more. He was a natural athlete, towering over most people and possessing incredible strength. As a young man, he trained in weightlifting and even competed at a high level, showing off the raw power that would later make him a force in the ring. His journey to professional wrestling wasn't a direct one. Like a lot of European wrestlers of that era, he found his way into wrestling through his athletic background. Eventually, he made his way to Canada and then to the United States, where he was trained by none other than the legendary Stu Hart in the infamous Hart Dungeon. Now, if you know anything about pro wrestling history, you know that training in the dungeon wasn't for the faint of heart. It was a brutal, old-school grind where only the toughest survived. Volkoff survived and thrived. Before he was the Soviet supervillain, Volkoff wrestled under various names, including Beeple Mongol. As one half of the Mongols tag team, managed by Captain Lou Albano, he began making a name for himself in the late 1960s and early 1970s. He was big, mean, and could crush people in the ring, which were qualities that made him a perfect monster heel. During this time, he wrestled in the WWF, which was the precursor to WWF, in various territories, always playing the foreign menace role which was so popular in that era. Whether he was billed as a Mongol, a generic Eastern European powerhouse, or a full-fledged Soviet threat, the guy knew how to draw heat. By the mid-1970s, he fully embraced the Nikolai Volkoff character, a proud Soviet athlete who had nothing but disdain for American fans. It was the perfect gimmick at the perfect time. The Cold War was in full swing, and American audiences loved to hate anything that represented the USSR. Vince McMahon Sr. saw the potential and pushed Volkoff as a top villain. One of his earliest feuds under the Volkoff persona came against the great Bruno Sammartino, the longtime WWF champion and fan favorite. Volkoff was booked as a monster challenger for Bruno, giving the champ some serious headaches in the ring. Though he never won the title, these matches helped establish him as a legitimate main event heel. While Volkoff had a solid solo career, his most famous run undoubtedly came in the mid-1980s when he teamed up with the Iron Sheik. If you were watching WWF in 1984 and 1985, you remember these guys. They were the ultimate foreign villain duo, Volkoff, the Soviet powerhouse, and Sheik, the Iranian madman. Managed by classy Freddie Blassie, they were the epitome of everything that 80s American wrestling fans loved to boo. At the first ever WrestleMania in 1985, Volkoff and Sheik defeated the US Express to win the WWF Tag Team Championship. This was a huge moment, not just for Volkoff's career but for the history of WrestleMania. Winning the titles at the biggest wrestling event of all time cemented their place in history. Their matches were classic old-school tag team bouts, Volkoff using his brute strength, Sheik using his technical skills and dirty tactics. They feuded with teams like the British Bulldogs, the Killer Bees, and the Hart Foundation, always drawing some of the loudest boos in the building. As the 80s rolled on, Volkoff continued his role as the evil Soviet, though his status as a serious contender started to fade. He had memorable feuds with guys like Corporal Kirchner, because what's better than an American military hero versus a Soviet bad guy? And even turned into a comedic character at times. But no matter what, whenever he started singing that Soviet anthem before a match, you knew the boos were coming. Then came one of the most surprising moments in his career, the face turn. In the early 90s, with the Cold War effectively over, the Soviet Union collapsing, WWF decided to turn Volkoff into a sympathetic figure. He began showing respect for the United States and and started feuding with the new crop of foreign villains, including a young Ludwig Borga. The gimmick shift was strange for longtime fans who had spent years booing Volkoff, but he played it well. He even teamed up with Hacksaw Jim Duggan at times, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years prior. Volkoff's full-time career in WWF wrapped up in the early 90s, but he never truly left the business. He made sporadic appearances over the years, popping up in various Legends matches, indie promotions, and even showing up in WWE for special events. Outside of wrestling, he was known as a genuinely kind-hearted guy. The man who played one of wrestling's most hated villains was, by all accounts, a beloved figure backstage and in his personal life. He lived a quiet life in Maryland and stayed connected to the wrestling community until his passing in 2018. Nikolai Volkoff was one of the greats when it came to playing a classic wrestling heel. He wasn't the flashiest worker, but he didn't need to be. He understood the art of drawing heat, and he did it better than most. Whether he was teaming with the Iron Sheik, battling Bruno Sammartino, or leading a chorus of boos with the Soviet anthem, he made sure fans remembered him. He was a guy who took a simple gimmick and turned it into something iconic. And even though the Cold War is long over, and the wrestling business has changed, his contributions to the sport are still remembered today. If you grew up in the 80s, you booed him. If you met him later in life, you probably shook his hand. That's the legacy of Nikolai Volkoff, a villain in the ring, but a class act in real life. Sadly, Nikolai Volkoff passed away on July 29, 2018. At the age of 70, he had been dealing with health issues, including dehydration and heart problems, and was released from the hospital just days before he was found unresponsive in his home. His passing hit the wrestling world hard. Fans who had spent years booing him now mourn his loss, and tributes poured in from all corners of the industry. His family, especially his wife and children, were devastated. Volkoff had been a devoted husband and father, and his passing left a deep void in their lives. Friends and fellow wrestlers spoke of his kindness and generosity, remembering the man behind the villainous persona. His legacy lives on, not just as a wrestling legend, but as a genuinely good man who made an unforgettable impact on the industry. Well, that's all we've got time for today, and a big thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our future content. See you in the next video.